Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh's ongoing visit to Cambodia to attend the India-ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit, important though on its own, may get overshadowed by the series of bilateral meetings he's scheduled to have with various leaders including Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao and US President Barack Obama, fresh from his victory for a second term in the White House. However, India's role in the ASEAN region is something which cannot be undermined, and the expectation from the 10 ASEAN countries itself is a key factor. The meetings, both at the summits as well as in the bilateral meetings with various leaders, will see Prime Minister Dr. Singh pushing forward for better economic ties and the launch of negotiations for a regional comprehensive economic partnerships among ASEAN and its FTA partners. However, the South China dispute and its history of controversies is casting a shadow on the summits. What can we expect from this visit of the Prime Minister, Dr. Singh, and what are the possible outcomes of it? How does the presence of US President Obama impact on the discussions? Will India play a more active role as a balancing factor in the region? We will discuss all this today with Dr. Shankar Bajpai, a distinguished former Indian ambassador to China, among other countries, Prof.Baladas Ghoshal, Distinguished Fellow, Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, Prof. B.R.Deepak, Center for Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies, JNU. Welcome to all of you. Let me first go to Dr. Bajpai. Dr. Bajpai, this meeting of the Prime Minister, this visit of the Prime Minister, do you think that the bilateral visits will overshadow the actual summits?
I hope not. I was about to start by saying I hope that your initial remarks might be wrong on that point, because I think the relationship with the ASEAN countries are so important by themselves that they need to be given more priority both in our public consciousness and in our policy making. And whereas the bilateral contacts that these occasions provide are certainly very, very important, especially after we see the new leadership emerging in Washington and in Beijing, but the Beijing leadership will not be represented there. But still, it would be important to have these bilateral negotiations. But I repeat that the actual relationship with the ASEAN countries should be one of India's top priorities and do not need to play second fiddle to anyone else. By the way, I have not been given a doctorate, so you're promoting me.
Okay, I think all that experience which you have in diplomacy should give you an automatic, doctorate. Anyway.
Well, I am a professor, but not a doctor.
Okay, you're a professor. Professor Ghoshal, yes, here I have a professor who is also a doctor, I'm sure. Professor Ghoshal, Dr. Bajpai, sorry, Mr. Bajpai is, saying that the summits itself should not be underplayed, but the fact is that if Prime Minister is meeting the Chinese Premier and the US President, do you think these two meetings are more important than the meetings of the ASEAN Summit?
In fact, they're part of the whole thing.
Yes.
In fact, the whole idea of this summit is to meet collectively and also bilaterally at the sidelines, because otherwise they don't get many occasions to meet each other.
My question, Professor Ghoshal, is, do you think these meetings on the sidelines will confine themselves to issues around the ASEAN, or do you think these, say for India, the Indian Prime Minister meeting Barack Obama, still it's not confirmed, but if he meets, and the meeting with the Chinese Premier has already taken place, just now the reports have come in.
All these issues are going to come up in the East Asian Summit meetings and also in the meetings of the ASEAN leaders.
Right.
So you cannot really divorce one from the other. Now, when you are talking about importance of ASEAN in India's foreign policy, you will see that this time also many of the ASEAN leaders have really talked about a much higher profile on the part of India. In Southeast Asia.
Absolutely.
In fact, this demand has been coming for quite some time. Even the United States also wanted India to play a much more active role.
Right.
But India is still, I think, hesitating to take a much higher profile. They would like India's policy capabilities in this region to be augmented. I think ASEAN countries are really now concerned about the rise of China.
Right.
And they don't really know how to deal with that. Although the United States, now with the pivot in Asia, they are coming in a big way in this region, but they are not very happy with that. Although they would encourage the United States.
They want somebody closer to be.
Closer in Asia to be a balancer to China's rising power. Now, the United States, they have actually last year or year before last, they had lobbied with United States, Barack Obama and other leadership in the Western countries to have a much greater presence in this region. Yet they are not very secure in that because they think that this might lead to a kind of a confrontation between the United States and China. So they would not like to see that.
I just want to go back to Mr. Shankar Bajpai. Mr. Bajpai, Professor Ghoshal's statement that India is still not too keen as keen as the ASEAN nations are for the kind of role which it wants India to play. Why do you think there is this hesitation on part of India?
I don't think there is any hesitation on the part of our policymakers. I would like to expand on what I said earlier when I said that I hope the ASEAN summit will not be considered less important than the other meetings bilaterally.
Right.
But the reason I emphasize that is that because in the public consciousness and the public discourse in this country, it is true that our attention to ASEAN as such and to the individual members of ASEAN does not get the prominence that I believe it deserves and that our policymakers would like it to have. And I agree with Professor Ghoshal that there are other countries that are eager that we play an active role, but I'm sure he would agree with me that ultimately it is our own assessments and our own policies that need to be geared up, because the ASEAN countries are of great importance both strategically and economically,
right,
and not to mention politically,
right,
in our dealings with the rest of the countries of that region. And our close relationships with ASEAN will enhance both the flexibility and the strength of our international relationships as a whole. I therefore believe that the real problem in our developing these kinds of relationship is not the lack of will or intention on the part of our government, but the very unfortunate, what shall I say, isolationism that has been characteristic of India's approach to the world over the centuries. We're really not showing the kind of interest that we ought to and that the regional countries of ASEAN want us to. And the other aspect of this, which is perhaps the most worrying of all, is that our capacity to function as a state in the international arena is severely limited by the politico-administrative apparatus in India being in need of very, very drastic reform. We just are not able to do the things that the other countries are expecting from us, whether in reforming our economic relationship or in forging the kind of constructive involvement like the building of roads through
Yes.
Myanmar into
Yes.
ASEAN. These are things that we need to do in our interest, and yet what I call the politico-administrative apparatus of India is still not functional in that respect.
Okay. Anand, these are very strong words for what the ambassador is saying, that India, the politico-administrative apparatus. Mr. Bajpai should know this better than any of us here because he has been part of that apparatus. Where do we know? He says that one, we are not taking the kind of interest which we should take as a nation about other nations, and ASEAN itself is asking where do you see the problem there?
I think most of us would be in agreement with what Ambassador Bajpai just said. He put it across very succinctly. But I do not think it is for a want of our desire, to establish or forge closer links with the ASEAN. But don't forget, the story goes back to P.V. Narasimha Rao's
Right, Look East policy.
The Look East, this was the early 90s.
Right.
And at that time, I recall, since then, there's been constant or recurring talk of doing some iconic projects. The railways have been talked about in this connection. Roads have been talked about in this connection, and various other things. they haven't yet taken off, and that is where what Mr. Bajpai said just now, it is not
the politico-administrative apparatus not being able to
the apparatus,
live up to
the push that has been, not, seen to the degree that is needed. And all these ASEAN countries on their own, they're very small countries.
Right.
Right. And perhaps the systems they run are not, labyrinthine like ours with huge territory, diverse population and so on, union of states,
different
etc.,
priorities.
So yes, all of these things. The domestic political systems which they run perhaps enable them more easily than ours does to achieve their targets,
focus
more
on
quickly. But I think the important thing to grasp is that persistently in the last 15 or 20 years, all our prime ministers, all our leaders, irrespective of parties they belong to, have not lost that focus. They have, there have been different stages, some slow, some quicker.
But the pace has not been what it could have been.
Quicker, better.
What it could have been.
But at one time, we began by trying to become dialogue partners.
Right.
It has been 20 years, but it has not been 20 years straight. You're not allowed a high jump straight away. You have to go through various stages in order to get to this this level.
Professor Deepak, do you agree with what Anand says? Another important thing is about the meetings, the Chinese factor, what Professor Ghoshal also was talking about, that the ASEAN nation itself wants India as a balancing factor as far as China is concerned. US wants it. Do we want it?
I think I agree with what Ambassador Bajpai and Anand said, that this apparatus has some discrepancies maybe are there, and then
it needs some oiling.
I think one is the political will, is not there. I think above that, the kind of capabilities we have, I think, are simply not enough. You see our comprehensive national strength. I think that is the major factor in this. Whether we would like to, play a bigger role or be ready for that role. I mean, strategically in the region.
Are we
be like countervailing China? I think we are not. To be very, very frank. I think as far as Ambassador Bajpai's concern about, and that also Anand reflected in his statement, and also Professor Ghoshal, that we need to look into our interests first. What are our priorities? Like economic engagement. Ever since our Lookist policy have been there in place, I think it has been going on steadily. And if you see the bilateral trade with ASEAN, so it has been pretty okay. Almost above $80 billion, so pretty satisfactory. I think not very satisfactory, but I think it is the way we have been looking into it. And there are meetings at various levels, whether it is high level, ministerial level, and business to business community. I think that thing need to be these are the things which will build capacities, and I think that would translate into political will. I think that is the need of the hour.
Okay, Professor, Mr. Bajpai, we talk of the economic. The Prime Minister has spoken about the focus of this visit being economic, improving the economic ties. And in the meeting today, which he had with the Chinese Premier, also he spoke about, he's supposed to have spoken about the economic ties between India and China and the balance of payment and need for increased exports from India to China and all these things. But the fact of the matter, as Professor Ghoshal was pointing out, is that this key factor, that should India play the role of a balancer in that region?
I don't think we play a consciously balancing role. I think the strength of India as a state and as a military and economic power, plus the strength of its relationships with ASEAN and individual countries, automatically acts as what I would rather say is a stabilizing factor. It's not that we are out to tell the countries of ASEAN or China or other countries that, look, here we are, we're so strong, you be careful, don't do these things, we're a balancing factor. Right. I think that would be a wrong approach, and I'm sure it's not our approach. I think what we are trying to do is to build up the kind of relationships with ASEAN that gives them a greater sense of confidence in their own exercise of sovereignty, that they are not constantly under the pressure of the great superpower that has now emerged on their frontiers, and which, of course, we have to contend with also. So it's not a question of seeking to counter China, but to build up our own relationships in a strength where China automatically will allow for our interests and for ASEAN sovereignty, and therefore what I call a stabilizing as distinct from a balancing factor.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyway, stabilizing factor instead of a balancing factor, I think that's the key. We'll on this note, we'll go into a short break now. We'll come back soon and continue this discussion. Please keep watching. Welcome back. In the context of the visit of Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to Cambodia to attend the India-ASEAN summit, we are discussing the role of India in the ASEAN region as well as its relations with China. Professor Ghoshal, Mr. Bajpai made an interesting point. He said, stabilizing factor, play a stabilizing role instead of a balancing role. But there are demands from the ASEAN countries that India should help them strategically also in terms of defense, naval. Some of these countries badly require naval support and even equipments and things like that. Do you think India should be doing this? And if we do that, what will be the repercussions of it on our relations with China?
I would say that yes, I agree with Ambassador Bajpai. But our policy also should be, not only as a stabilizing factor in the region, but also should be directed towards creating a kind of a hedge against any future attempt on the part of China to do any harm to us. I think our closer relations with Southeast Asian countries and East Asian countries enables us to have that hedge against any future attempt on the part of China to do any harm.
I just want you to also dwell on this. The U.S. role, how far U.S. is pushing us to play this stabilizing role or balancing role.
This is where I always have been saying that our lookist policy is a kind of a reactive kind of a policy. It is not a proactive policy. Even at the time when Narasimha Rao espoused this policy of lookist in 1994, it was just a reaction to what was happening in the region, China's strategic advance in Myanmar, and also its influence in the region. And the fact that we look towards the East, not so much because we wanted it at that point of time, but the Southeast Asian countries really wanted us to be there because of their own strategic and economic needs. Because India was also opening, they wanted to have a major market in the region, and that's why they practically dragged India into the region. Now, this is where I always say that we have to really also be proactive towards the region. And look at what China has been doing, Chiang Mai Initiative, and all kinds of ASEAN +3. All the initiatives actually come from China. Now, so far, India has not been able to provide any niche towards the region so that they would really look towards India. And this is what I think the region is demanding.
Let me get Mr. Bajpai on this. Mr. Bajpai, Professor Ghoshal's statement that we have been more reactive than proactive in the region. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I'm afraid that is not limited to Southeast Asia. That is true of our approach to the world as a whole. Again, I'm sorry to say it, takya kalam jaise kehte hain. The fact of the matter is that within India we have reached a stage of political stasis and administrative non-functional, if I may say so, where almost any area, either of our international or even more important, some of our domestic and national security interests are suffering because we are not able to take the proactive or the initiatives that are absolutely essential if this country is to achieve its potential.
Okay. Anand, one more thing, we'll just keep that aside. Coming back to India and China, these meetings which Prime Minister had with Wen Jiabao, they knew there's going to be a change of guard there. The new leadership was not there today. But do you see this meeting as some kind of a bridge between the new leadership and the present leadership? India is trying to build that bridge?
I tell you what, I think it may be useful just to go back to the question that we were just discussing. I think it is by and large true that we are more an elephant than a springing tiger. I mean, that's always been the case because of whatever our history and so on, the nature of the political system we run. But I think overall, I mean, that granted that we are slow to, we are more reactive, more reactive than we need to, and so on. All that is there by and large in the backdrop of most of our decision making on the whole. But I think in the year 94, when P.V. Narasimha Rao went for this Look East policy, that was also, it flowed as a consequence of the end of the Cold War.
Right.
Right. That and the opening up in the domestic, on the economic side, within the country. The two led us naturally towards a region which was then, at that time, and remained so for a long time, economically the most vibrant or dynamic region in the whole world. It could not be ignored. So it was not out of a sense of desperation or anything. It was a logical flow. And this whole China factor, now let me come to the China factor. It did not inhibit us at that point of time. We realized for our own good. Look at now, it's a growing awareness in the entire country that our northeast region, geographically so perfectly suited to be this bridge. We've had this Mekong, Ganga, all these things have been talked about. They have, it's still very much part of the thought process. Some of it is in the works, but nothing really has got going. We are thinking of car rallies, we're thinking of the question that you're raising. Naval sailing, sea expeditions, all of these things are there. There's also been talk, not now, from 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
Of India trying to play a role in the, even in the South China Sea.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at the recent case with Vietnam.
South
the
China
Chinese got upset. But on your last question, precisely speaking, the new Chinese PM is to take over in a couple of months. I mean, that's part of their domestic process, right? And of course, in India, whether even if the new China Prime Minister was there, it would not be, it'd be nice for the two leaders, our PM and the incoming Chinese PM, to be meeting and so on. It was basic acquaintance. I don't think they can be on the sidelines of a meet. You don't start doing some major brainstorming, But of course, by definition, any contact between the heads of state and government, they can discuss absolutely anything they wish. Nothing is
Deepak, so the question is, how much these meetings would mean? One more issue is in the ASEAN. We've always been talking of Burma, using Burma as a route to go to the Southeast Asian countries and things like that. Do you see any progress being achieved in this meeting on these issues which have been talked about for so long?
No, I think the meeting of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh with Bajpai, I think it's a routine meeting. Both the leaders, they have a great symmetry. They understand each other very well. They have met each other, various places, various times. And I think
he has visited India twice.
Yeah, he has visited India twice. One is 2005, another is 2010. And of course, in these meetings at the sideline of any summit, bilateral things, issues of concern, they are always discussed. And as it has been reported, all the issues, I think except border, we didn't, hear anything on border. But even at, representative level, this special representative, I don't see, any a conclusion, because already 38, 39 rounds have been held by both the countries.
So we'll have to wait and watch for the new leadership and what will be their attitude.
No, even I don't think I expect.
You don't expect any dramatic change in their policy.
So it has to be seen how much assertiveness, so they assert, when they come up, because this present leadership has raised the bar, really high by saying that, okay, it is a give and take on the border, otherwise no solution, So we have to wait and watch what the next leadership.
Professor Ghoshal, outcome of the ASEAN summit. What do you expect? Do you expect any major improvements in the relations? Do you expect anything on the economic side, or what do you expect?
I don't expect much progress from these summits or the meetings, because I think the issue that is really bothering
South China is South China.
That is South China Sea.
Where does India stand on that dispute? Would India like to stick its neck out and take a position on it? What the ASEAN nations expect India to do?
Not what it looks like. India has only talked about that South China Sea, there should be freedom of navigation.
Yes.
Apart from that, India has not really stated much.
Right.
And even India's linkage with Vietnam is going up and down on this particular issue. Once it went for the oil exploration, and then it withdrew, and again it has gone back.
Right.
I think India has reached a stage, stage is reached where India should, I think, look at it from a more strategic point of view. I'm not suggesting that we have to confront China, but at the same time, I think we should really try for a hedging against China and try to develop closer relationship with some of the Southeast Asian countries, even through major defense cooperation and support to some of these countries in building up
which they're expecting, which they're hoping. Okay, last words to you, Anand. The outcome of this summit, as Professor Ghoshal is saying, should India offer defense support to the ASEAN countries?
We are already there, I think, Girish. If you, in the PM speech, we've been using the word stability just now. The nub of it was that India sees it as a part of its strategic focus. The word is strategic, not so much stability. I'm not saying the two are always at odds with each other. But having said that, 3 years ago, we signed under the free trade agreement, for goods, free trade for goods, and today, in the latest round, for services. And we hope to clinch it by December, where the commemorative summit is to be held, right? And in the same speech, the PM has also spoken about defense cooperation. I mean, he's not sort of, put it under the carpet. When you're talking about overall economic and political cooperation, you cannot avoid all of these areas.
Running out of time. Last words to you, Mr. Bajpai. What kind of outcome do you expect out of this summit? Quickly, we are running completely out of time, Mr. Bajpai.
At the moment, it's an ongoing process. I don't think very startling things can be expected. But the first point is already been made that the South China Seas plus the Japanese islands issue are so prominent in the thinking of the other countries.
Right.
And you have a new leadership in China which is not represented there. The Obama visit to Myanmar is perhaps more important than what might emerge in Cambodia, but it is part of an ongoing engagement between various countries.
Okay.
And of course, from time to time they will meet without anything coming out, but it's a good process that we ought to be part of.
Okay, thank you. So, these kind of summits, though we can't expect any dramatic things, as Mr. Bajpai was pointing out, are something which needs to be kept a close watch on for the kind of different development which takes place there. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Shankar Bajpai, Anand Sahay, Professor Deepak, and Professor Ghoshal. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture, same time tomorrow.